some historical context.
Depleted uranium, also known as Q metal, D38, and Du, is a toxic and radioactive byproduct created in the production of enriched uranium for nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. It has a radioactive half-life of 4.4 billion years. The U.S. and NATO militaries began using bullets made of depleted uranium in 1991 in the Persian Gulf War, and they have continued using it in every major armed conflict since that time. Du is used because it is extremely dense, 1.6 times as dense as lead, which makes it ideal for piercing heavy armor. Just to give you an idea of how much this is being used, the U.S. fired 640,000 pounds of Du ammunition in the first Gulf War alone. In the initial 2003 invasion, they used an estimated 4 million pounds. When a depleted uranium shell hits its target, it explodes on impact, burning at extremely high temperatures, vaporizing into an ultrafine aerosol with a large percentage of the particles as small as 1/10 of a micron in size. To put that in perspective, these are literally as small as viruses. This depleted uranium dust spreads out into the atmosphere, where it finds its way into water and food supplies, and is inhaled by both soldiers and civilians living and moving throughout the area. Studies have shown that upon inhalation, these particles are small enough to pass through the nose, through the olfactory nerves, and into the brain, where it accumulates. Depleted uranium also accumulates in the bones and teeth due to the fact that the body replaces calcium with it. Governments that use Du always like to portray it as safe by referring to how solid chunks don't emit enough radiation to be harmful from a distance. But this defense fails to account for the fact that these microscopic radioactive particles, once absorbed into tissues, are in direct contact with cells throughout the body. And once it's in the body, there is no way to remove it, nor can these microscopic particles be removed from the environment at large. And remember, depleted uranium remains radioactive for over 4.4 billion years. One of the hidden tragedies of the Iraq wars has been the marked increase in birth defects, nervous system anomalies, and cancer rates. In some areas, birth defect rates have been shown to have increased by 15 times what they were before the war. It's also worth noting that after the Gulf War, thousands of soldiers became chronically ill and have never recovered. This condition is officially called Gulf War syndrome. The U.S. government denies that this illness has any connection with Du, even though soldiers far from the front lines have been found to have large quantities of these radioactive particles in their system. Now, given these facts, you would think that countries that claim to care about human rights would condemn the use of depleted uranium weaponry. However, there have been multiple attempts to impose a moratorium on its use over the years, but France, Britain, the US, and Israel have consistently blocked such proposals. The next time you hear one of these governments or the mainstream media of one of these countries talking about chemical or nuclear weapons that some country may have or be planning to build, keep that in mind.
The planned multi-billion-dollar U.S. missile defense shield in Europe might not be able to protect America from possible Iranian airstrikes. The flaws were highlighted in classified studies made by the Defense Department, prepared for a congressional briefing. For more on this, we are now joined live by Bruce Gagnon, a coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. Bruce, thank you very much for being with us. Now, first, let's get right to this. If the complex is flawed, why is it still on the cards to be built in the first place?
Well, first off, and most importantly, I don't think it was ever intended to protect against Iranian missiles, something, in fact, that do not even exist today. Iran has no nuclear weapons, nor do they have the capability to launch a missile all the way to the United States. So I think the so-called missile defense system, which in fact is a key part of U.S. first strike strategy, it's the shield to be used after the sword has lunged into the heart of Russian and Chinese nuclear forces. And clearly this missile defense system has always been about surrounding Russia and China. And that's why the math doesn't work when you look at having it protect against an Iranian system.
Now, one of the flaws that has been mentioned is the actual location of the system in Romania and Poland, something that we all know that Russia has been voicing their concerns about. Can we expect any changes on the location issue?
I don't think so. In fact, as NATO is expanding in its encirclement of Russia, I think we're only going to see more of these so-called, again, missile defense deployments into various NATO countries. So I think the ones in Poland and Romania, and now there's a radar going into Turkey. These are going to stay, but I think attempts are going to be made to put these systems into places like Georgia and other countries very close to the Russian borders, which in fact is only going to increase tensions between the United States and Russia, as is happening in China today, as the U.S. is encircling China with these same missile defense systems. The Aegis destroyers, the Navy destroyers that are outfitted with these missile defense interceptors, are going to be put into the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, Mediterranean Sea, really increasing the encirclement of Russia in the years ahead. And in fact, as the new generations of these interceptor missiles are built, they're going to become even more technologically sound, sophisticated, much faster, and that will only make the problem worse.
Well, given that the billions of dollars have already been spent on the system in its current state, it's now showing serious flaws. Does it make sense to spend any more money on this? Will the U.S. invest more?
I think it's a bad expenditure, of course, as our economy is collapsing here at home in the United States. We're wasting enormous amounts of money on the military-industrial complex. So clearly I'm opposed to these systems. But looking at how this oligarchy runs our country today, how the corporations control our Congress, I think it's clear that Congress will continue to support these systems. The new Secretary of Defense that Obama has nominated, Chuck Hagel, former Republican senator from Nebraska, was one of the co-sponsors in the Senate of the missile defense program. So he clearly is a strong ally of this system. And I think that he is being brought into running the Pentagon partly because of that relationship. What we're seeing right now is some criticism from the Republicans about this particular system, but there's a competition going on for various missile defense projects. The Boeing Corporation has projects that the Bush administration favored. The Obama administration has favored ones that are being manufactured by Raytheon and General Dynamics. And so really, what little argument we see in the Congress is more about which corporations are going to get the big contracts in the years ahead.
Now, Russia is warning it could make a preemptive strike against NATO's anti-missile defense shield planned for Europe if the US persists in going ahead, ignoring the Kremlin's opposition. Moscow says the system threatens its national security and is detailing its concerns at an international conference in the Russian capital with representatives from over 50 nations. Well, RT's Anissa Nawe joins us live now with more on this. Anissa, what exactly is Russia hoping to demonstrate at this international gathering?
Well, missile defense has been in a deadlock for some time now between the U.S., Russia, and NATO. And basically, Russian officials have already reiterated that sentiment, saying that if that deadlock is not resolved sometime in the near future, of course, they understand how much work needs to be done, that they will have to take responsive measures. Like you said, a preemptive strike. If there is no response from the U.S. or from NATO, this has been an issue for many years now, and Russia has made it very clear that a missile defense system, which started as planned, is already pretty much fully fledged underway in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Romania, even as far as Turkey. Russia sees that as a major threat to its national security, and officials here basically saying that they will have to move forward and take steps to protect themselves if they don't see a response from their partners in the U.S. and in NATO. Washington, for years, has been trying to convince Russia that the system is not against them, that it's meant to be a deterrent against so-called rogue states like Iran and North Korea. Well, officials at this summit are going to show basically the results of research that they've done to prove that they believe both North Korea and Iran don't have the capability to reach Europe. So major questions surrounding the goals of that defense system so close to the Russian border. We also know that they're going to show a computer model of how that missile defense system affects Russian systems just outside its border, of course, especially in Poland. So real concern here from the Russian side and harsh rhetoric in response to that lack of response from the U.S. and from NATO. We're hearing a lot of similar statements about how dialogue has to happen, but really what officials needs to see, and we're hearing this certainly from the Russian side, is some kind of compromise. The way Russia sees it, the way out of this, is only if there's some kind of joint system between NATO and the Russian Federation, and that is something that hasn't gotten quite positive response from the U.S. Or from NATO officials, continuing to try to prove their point, really, about why they believe this is such a threat to Russia's national security. With that said, no major breakthroughs are expected. It's an election year. Let's not forget that open mic in South Korea when President Obama told Medvedev to hang in there, that compromises could come after the election, and it's election year, of course, in many countries across the globe in 2012. So we have to take that into consideration. And also the fact that invited to this summit, but not taking up on that invitation, was NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who declined, but his spokesperson saying that that in no way represents his openness or readiness for dialogue. But that's not going to be taken as a very good sign ahead of an upcoming major NATO summit in Chicago at the end of this month. What it seems like we're going to hear from officials as this two-day summit wraps up is that there needs to be baby steps, that this is a difficult issue. Both sides are going to push to the end to defend their interests.
Talk more on the Russia and America dialogue about missile defence is the Paris-based political analyst John Laughlin, joining us now indeed from Paris. John, hi there. NATO says the missile shield poses no threat to Russia because Moscow's intercontinental ballistic missiles are, quote, too fast and too sophisticated for this planned system to intercept. It's not convincing Moscow, though, is it? Does it convince you?
It doesn't convince me, no, and I find it pretty rich, actually, that the Americans should be saying this about their missile system when they refuse to listen to the Iranians, who say that their civilian nuclear program poses no threat whatever to anybody. Threats are a matter of perception, but also of reality. And the fact is that, as far as we know, Iran has no nuclear weapons capability and doesn't plan one, while the Americans are planning a missile shield, which, although they may be telling the truth when they say it's not directed against Russia, the fact is it's a new weapons system, and it can be presumably directed against Russia in a matter of seconds. So no, it doesn't convince me.
There was comment earlier on from a French defence official saying that Iran's nuclear programme poses a, quote, risk rather than a threat to Europe's security. What does it mean by that? Is there a point, therefore, of having the shield if it's just a risk?
Well, I don't really know what the official means, and in any case, I don't personally share that analysis. I don't think that Iran is going to attack a European country, still less the United States of America. That seems to me to be an absolute fantasy. It's not my view. And in any case, part of my answer is that one of the reasons why I think that it won't do that is that the costs in terms of retaliation of such an attack, were it to happen, are obviously immense. So Iran would have to be mad to launch such an attack. And that's why I find the whole discussion about the missile shield and the Iranian hypothetical attack completely fantastic.
Russia's been trying to talk reason here for a long time now. I mean, the latest words today, though, certainly ramping up the rhetoric, if you like. Russia's saying it could make a preemptive strike if, quote, very importantly, the situation worsens and reaches a critical point. What is that critical point?
Well, the critical point would be if there was some kind of conflict looming between the United States and Russia, and if there was some prospect of missiles being fired at Europe or across Europe to America. We're obviously a very long way away from that, at least I hope we are. The reason why the Russian minister made this remark, why the Russian defense official made this remark, is to show the logical conclusion of what the Americans are doing. The Americans are planning to install new military hardware on the continent of Europe, a continent which has struggled now for 20 years to rid itself of the inheritance of the Cold War. And the logical military implication of that act is that at some point a strike might have to be contemplated.
Will those words from Russia today make any difference? Do you think the US will take Russia's ultimatum seriously, given, of course, that any preemptive strike would be far away, I guess, from American soil?
Well, the fact that it's far away from American soil doesn't really make any difference, because it's an American system, and the Americans are trying to obviously extend their influence either through directly or through NATO over the whole of the European continent and on other continents as well. So the fact that any such attack wouldn't actually hit America is of no consequence at all. Would the Americans be bothered by the ultimatum? I think they should be. As I say, I don't think we are looking at a military conflict at any time soon. But I think they have to understand that this missile defense system is very serious. They may say it doesn't affect Russia or isn't intended against Russia, but like any weapons system, frankly, like a knife, it depends on who is holding it and on the circumstances of the moment.
Really, really briefly, if at the moment anyway the US still won't give legal guarantees that this shield won't breach Russia's national security, what is the way forward, do you think, to break this defence stalemate?
The way forward is either for the Americans to integrate Russia into the unified command of the defense system, of the missile shield, or to abandon it completely.